So, in the midst of the coronavirus and everything going on, there was the temptation to change the sermon. And Joey and I discussed that and realized a couple of things. First of all, we realized that stewardship is a part of discipleship, so it should be preached on anytime. Also, the fact that normalcy is something that we seek in times of crisis. So why would we change what we're planning to do at this time? Yes, we do take precautions. Yes, we do change certain activities. But maybe we shouldn't change all aspects of our life. The other reality is, in the midst of what's happening, stewardship and the needs of the church suddenly become even more apparent as we see a drop in attendance because of the illness, as we see possibly the reality that next week, depending on what happens this week, we may not be able to gather to worship in person. We may be gathering to worship online. So talking about giving and talking about the opportunity to give online is important. On your stewardship card, you have a barcode that you can scan that will take you to a link where you can give online. You also have the website. I know that it's easy to give online because I did it before worship. It takes about 30 seconds once you've set it up. You go to the website, you click give, it takes you to the page. You tell it how much you want to give. You go down to the bottom. You want to give that once a day, weekly, monthly. How do you want to give it, and what account do you want it to come out of? Click, and it's done. It's that simple to give online. So as we begin, I decided that I would go ahead and preach the stewardship sermon, that we would have our commitment card opportunity to prayerfully consider giving and returning our commitment cards. Because as you consider the places where Jesus walked and the topics he taught on, you don't have to dig very deep to find the topic of financial stewardship. In fact, Jesus talked about the topic of money, provision, and stewardship over and over to emphasize how it is that we are to live in relationship with God. Now, keep in mind that some pastors are going to tell you Jesus preached on money more than any other topic, and they've got their exegesis a little bit wrong. He did not, but he did use the subject of our money, our provisions, our stewardship as an example more than any other of how it is that we live in relationship with God. So today, as I said earlier, I want you to have the opportunity to bring your commitment card to the front during the singing of the final hymn. I want you to take this opportunity, guided by the ushers, to come to the front and leave your card on the altar rail to pray and then return to your seat. I know some of you have returned your commitment card in the offering plate already, or you've mailed them in. That's okay. You're not required to come to the front. But if you would like to come to the front, just kneel simply and pray over the cards that are near you. That is fine as well. Some of you filled out a commitment card last fall and don't feel like you need to fill another one out. I'm not going to twist your arm and make you fill out another commitment card. That's okay. I want you to know that those commitment cards are in a sleeve on my desk, and periodically I still pull them out, go through them one at a time, and pray for you, just as I will with these. So I want you to take the opportunity to prayerfully consider what it is God's calling you to give this day and for this year. So as we begin our sermon, let me pause for a prayer. Holy God, pour your Spirit upon me and upon us gathered here, and that the words of my mouth and the meditations of our collective hearts may be acceptable in your sight, O Lord, our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. Now, I could have titled this sermon, The Blessing of Addiction, but in the sensational headlines we're seeing these days, someone may have accused me of being overly sensational. But the truth is, we live in a world of excess. Our culture says you need more, more, more. If you don't have the energy to get it all, we've got a drug for that. If you're too anxious, just have another shot of scotch. You'll be fine. If you like what you see, take it. It's no wonder that our society has a problem with addiction, whether it's drugs or sex or alcohol or adrenaline or power. We have a problem with addiction. And often we think of an addiction as a curse. Often we think of addictions being something that one must manage to get along with life. Often we see addiction as something that happens to those people who are all messed up. That's why a comment I heard once, a man told me that my addiction is one of my greatest blessings. That just seemed like such an odd comment to me. It seems so out of place. It was a comment like that is so hard for us to comprehend unless we begin to realize and understand what this addict was actually saying. He was saying that life throws us a curveball every now and then, and we make the best of it. He wasn't saying that his addiction itself was a blessing. What he was saying is that we make the best of our life that we have, the cards that we're dealt. In other words, we have the power to choose how we respond to what happens to us on life's journey, and we can determine if what we experience is a tragedy or a turning point, a burden or a blessing. This addict saw the blessing in his struggle. And he was grateful for the life that he has lived, and it is a part of who he is today and forever will be. It's the same way one of this year's contestants on American Idol, I don't know how many of you watch that show. It's kind of, all these talent shows are kind of getting old, but this particular one, there's a young lady named Marna Michelle. She was born with a disease that I can't pronounce that caused her muscles to be weak and her joints to be weak. She is normal in every way except she can't lift her hand over her shoulder and she can't stand and walk. She's confined to a wheelchair. But in the interview before her audition, she said that her disability, the disability that has confined her to a wheelchair, is one of her greatest blessings. You know, it's not until we can declare the bad things that happen to us or the best things that ever happened to us that we begin to live with the serenity of a life of faith and gratitude much beyond anything we could imagine before. Instead, we try to store up treasures on earth like tuna and toilet paper, because evidently you can battle the coronavirus with tuna and toilet paper. Yeah, I know that's tongue-in-cheek, but the reality is we seem to store up treasures. We seem to store up our stuff, our money, our depreciable items that really, in the grand scheme of things, don't matter. Yet we fail to focus on the lives we can touch and change by helping one another know, love, and serve God. You know, even in the midst of this fear and frustration, this panic and this posturing, all of which are bouncing around like a web we're caught in every time we turn on the TV. Even in the midst of all of that, we can reach out through a phone call, through a card to offer love, to help others to know that God loves them, that they can serve. I want you to look around the room. You know the people that sit on the pews around you. Look at who's missing. Call them this week. Check on them. Offer them a word of encouragement, a word of love. Love one another. Check on one another. Further down in the passage, we find Jesus talking about serving two masters, money or God, that you can't serve these two masters. And I think that somewhere between the worship of money that we see in our society and the vow of poverty that some take, I believe somewhere in the midst of that is where God calls us to live. And I think it's a life that I would call the life of gratitude and generosity. Another passage we might think of when we think of gratitude and generosity is found in Luke 17. Beginning in verse 11, it says, "On the way to Jerusalem, Jesus was going through the region of Samaria and Galilee. As he entered a village, 10 lepers approached him. Keeping their distance, they called out, saying, 'Jesus, Master, have mercy on us.' When he saw them, he said to them, 'Go and show yourself to the priests.' And as they went, they were made clean. Then one of them, when he saw that he was healed, turned back, praised God with a loud voice. He prostrated himself at Jesus' feet and thanked him. And he was a Samaritan. Then Jesus asked, 'Were not 10 made clean? But the other 9, where are they? Was none of them found to return and give praise to God except this foreigner?' Then he said to him, 'Get up and go on your way. Your faith has made you well.'" You know, the 10 lepers of Luke 17 give us a biblical picture of gratitude. It's a picture that is as relevant today as it was 2,000 years ago. It's as much a picture of life in our society as it was in Galilee. You know, there's 10 lepers. Now, it means they had a skin disease of some kind. In that culture, psoriasis or acne would have been considered leprosy. But this illness seemed to be more than just a rash. Scholars believe it was the disease that we think of when we talk about leprosy and leprosy colonies today. These 10 men were sick. Their illness prevented them from worshiping God in the temple or the synagogue. It prevented them from being acceptable company to anyone. Their illness made people fear them. And here Jesus is walking along the border between the acceptable and the unacceptable, the Jews and the Samaritans, the clean and the unclean. The fact that he would travel here and minister was already a scandal. That he would allow a leper to talk to him and he would talk back to the leper and offer healing was absurd. But Jesus did more than just talk to them. Jesus told them to go to their priests to be declared clean. And as they went, they were healed. As they turned and took that first step of faith, believing the words Jesus had said, they became clean. You know, we know what it's like to quarantine. We know what it means to shun someone with the hint of a disease. We know what it means to ostracize, exile, and quarantine people. You know, I hear Eric cough, and I want to keep my distance, even though I know he's well because he had the flu 2 weeks ago, and he has that lingering cough you get when you have the flu. He's been free of fever for days, so you're fine. I have a little cough from allergies. I think I need to quarantine myself. COVID-19 has terrified us beyond all sense of reason. People who were simply have been in the same room with a non-symptomatic person are quarantined. Schools are closing because family members of students traveled out of town and may bring the illness back and then infect someone else and someone else and someone else. We can think back to the Ebola virus. You remember that Carnival cruise ship that was floating around in the Gulf? All because one person on the cruise ship was a medical professional who handled a vial of blood using all safety precautions and procedures. They quarantined the entire ship. No one would allow them to dock because this person, before she got on the ship, had touched a vial of blood in the proper procedures doing testing that showed to have the illness, Ebola. We saw the same thing recently. the cruise ship off the coast of Japan. I cannot think of a worse place to quarantine people because all you're doing is circulating the illness among the people. But yet, they weren't allowed to come ashore. Today, we're restricting travel to and from the U.S. I've got a friend of mine doing the John Wesley tour in England right now. I'm not sure if he's going to be able to come back to preach at his church next week. Don't get me wrong, I'm not saying this is a hoax or fake news or anything like that. This strain of coronavirus is the worst the world has seen in recent history. It's far worse than SARS or MERS, and there is reason for caution and precaution, many of which we have enacted here at First United Methodist Church. We're going to continue to monitor the situation, and we're going to have more opportunities online in the near future. We want to do our part to help slow the spread of the virus. But what I'm saying is we know what it means to be the establishment that exiles someone for their illness out of fear. What we don't know is what it's like to be one of those exiled. I can't imagine what that is like, to be ostracized because you have a cough or a fever. But some do. Think about John Herring. That's awfully close to my wife's last name, but it's different. The first American diagnosed on that Japanese cruise ship with COVID-19, coronavirus. He was exiled not only from the cruise ship, he was sent to the hospital where he had to stay. Think of his wife. She was sitting in that stateroom. How many of you have been on a cruise ship on an interior stateroom? If you haven't, imagine a walk-in closet with 2 beds and a bathroom and a closet. That is what the stateroom is. She didn't even have a window to look out, and she was stuck there in the room with all the surfaces that her husband had touched, who now had coronavirus. She was an exile. She was an outcast. They knew what it meant to be ostracized. But they also knew what it meant to be declared clean. Mr. Herring went through the illness, recovered, had no fever, was allowed to go home. No longer was he an outcast that many were waiting to die. The priests of our society, the doctors, had declared him clean. They declared his wife clean. His exile was over and he has come home. I can only imagine that's what it felt like for these 10 lepers. As they walked away from Jesus, they were healed. They were going to the priest to be declared clean and acceptable in society. But only one of them came back to thank Jesus. Only one showed gratitude. Only one chose to worship God, fall at Jesus' feet, and he wasn't even one of the chosen one. He was one of the dirty, nasty Samaritans, as that culture would have put it. That Samaritan came back and said thank you and gave the only thing he had, his praise to God and his gratitude to Jesus. This Samaritan had been given life itself. He understood the abundant life that Jesus offers. That Samaritan understood that Jesus was and is the giver of life. I don't know what happened with the other 9. We can speculate. Maybe they felt like they deserved to be healed, or maybe they felt entitled, or maybe they'd always gotten what they wanted, so it was no big deal to get this. I don't know. What we do know is that the privileged seldom recognize the gift of God that is given and received. The humble see the gift and they are grateful. And the problem with that statement is that more of us fall into that privileged than humble. And it has absolutely nothing to do with your money, your race, your class, or anything else. Whether we're privileged or humble has to do with our heart. And the privileged have a much harder time with gratitude than the humble. So what does this passage have to do, with addictions or struggle and all that stuff? What does all it have to do with generosity? Well, just as the privileged have a harder time with gratitude, they have a harder time with generosity. You see, generosity and gratitude are kind of two sides of the same coin. And the point isn't about money or class, but studies do show that the poor and those of lower socioeconomic groups give more as a percentage than the wealthy and, quote, privileged class. Here's where I'm going with this. Today, our church is at a turning point. We are full of generous and grateful people. People that have helped do amazing things and make amazing things happen in this community. I can look around this room, and in my short 20 months of living here, I can point out people who have had a significant impact on this church, on this community, and on this county. People that are helping this church do amazing things and reach new people for Christ. I mean, our children's ministry is growing exponentially. It's amazing to see. Our youth ministry is reaching new people, offering Christ in new ways. I can tell that you have been inviting people and offering Christ in this community because it shows. Maybe not this week, but other weeks it shows. Where the challenge comes in is the fact that our giving has not kept pace with our growth. Our financial commitments to the church have not grown with all the awesome things we've seen happening. Month after month, we're just a little bit behind. And by the time we get to December and we say we're $120,000, $150,000, $180,000 behind, everyone's surprised. But it happened month by month, a little at a time. But here's the thing. If 300 of us pledge to give another $50 a month, we would exceed the shortage. Think about that. 300 of us gave $50 a month. For some, that means they're new to the church. They haven't really been given anything, and they pledge $50 for the first time. For some of us, we can't see ourselves giving another $50, but we can give $25. Someone else may say, well, I can give $100. But if we'd averaged out, 300 of us simply gave $50 a month more, we would exceed our shortfall, and we would see the opportunity for expanded ministries that we're dreaming of, reaching new children, starting new ministries in the community, expanding our local and foreign mission opportunities. That's why I wanted to give us the opportunity to review our pledges, to look ahead at where God is calling this church to be, not just today, but in the future. I know that you believe in the mission and vision of this church. And we truly believe that we are called by God to make new disciples of Jesus Christ by helping others to know, love, and serve God. So this week, as we pray about what God is calling us to do with our commitment card, as we think about the life we have, we need to be centered on the life giver, on Jesus, and be grateful for all that we have and all that we are. As we look at our lives and we strive for this abundant life promised by God, we find the answer in these two words: gratitude and generosity. Looking at all that God has done, being grateful, and in return being generous. So let's not create storehouses on earth where moth and rust destroy. Let us instead create houses of generosity, reaching new people with the abundant life that Christ offers.